We are so privileged to have Bishop Howell join us to give us an update on the 21 Days of Peace initiative and to give us his perspective on the role of religion, community, and gathering. Please join me in welcoming Bishop Richard Howell to our St. Joan of Arc community.
Thank you very, very much, Michael, and to all of you today. God bless you. My brothers and sisters, we are in a time of crises. The inner cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul are too often scenes of violence marked by yellow tape and shrouded bodies. I have been the eulogist, and my church has been the site of funeral services of young African-American young men at an outrageous rate. In late May, Reverend Jerry McAfee, pastor of New Salem Baptist Church, approached our understaffed and overwhelmed police departments. They were asked to identify hotspots, places in which the number of gunshots and illegal trafficking in drugs was most intense and the safety of the citizenry most in jeopardy. Following his lead, over 150 days ago, a group of African-American clergy joined together to begin what we call 21 Days of Peace. We determined that as kingdom ambassadors, we needed to move outside our church walls and become salt and light by showing up at the hot spots. The governor, the police chiefs, and the commissioner of public safety have publicly declared that the Kingdom Warriors' presence has made a difference. Despite continuing headlines of shootings that tell us the battle is far from over, there is clear evidence that our presence, caring, and standing up make a difference. I was sharing this morning about one of our own workers, and all these clergy had been appointed a hotspot to patrol. Our hotspot area is Broadway and Lindale, where the Merwin's liquor store is located. We had a team there passing out snow cones, and one of our workers was shot. As a bullet, fortunately, she turned her body at the very instant the bullet made impact in her body. Went through her side and came out. She lived. Thank God for that. But it was amazing that as she was laying in the parking lot, that the people that she was ministering to came around and protected her and guarded her and said, "We are with you, mother." It's amazing what a ministry of presence will do to be the light of the world and the salt of the earth. What is the word of the Lord into our season today? What is the opportunity of our time together? Are there lessons we have learned? Is there a benefit to our present encounter? I am persuaded that the last 5 chapters of the book of Judges offer a cautionary tale that we would all do well to consider that might point our way forward. They begin with this observation: in those days there was no king in Israel. And after recounting a set of horrible acts, the book ends with a sobering additional commentary. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. To center our thoughts, let me offer as a title for my remarks, Out of Order. When we see these words written or hear them spoken, we make one of several possible conclusions. Something requires repair before it functions as it should, or there is a problem in which proper sequence is violated. It could be that the decorum that we expect has been disrupted, or someone may be operating contrary to established rules. When in the course of our journey through life, we encounter the indication that something is out of order, and it behooves us to take action to correct the matter, or at least to receive the warning and avoid the hazards of the situation. The 18th chapter introduces us to the adventures of the tribe of Dan as they were about in the land looking for a place to claim for themselves. A patrol runs into a people living in a city called Laish. The patrol observed these people were quite comfortable. They observed two other things. Number one, they lived far away from their relatives. And number two, the people that did live near them, they had no dealings with whatsoever. While some may call them ancient or even primitive people, because they did not have a Kirby vacuum cleaner, cellular telephones, or automobile transport, their attitudes were as thoroughly modern as Millie's ever could be. A me, myself, and I, or my four and no more mindset. A very self-contained, self-absorbed approach to life. And it was these very modern attitudes that illustrate that they were a society totally out of order. You see, when our lives do not reflect an acceptance of the priorities of our heavenly King, we are out of order and in serious jeopardy. The people of that time were living in violation of two God-ordered priorities of life. Let me suggest that the violation of God's first priority is found in this statement that closes the book of Judges. In those days there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Political scientists have a term to define a condition in which there are no laws and each person determines their actions and behaviors by what they think is best in their own eyes. This is called anarchy. Whether we read historical accounts written by Henry Steele Camager or pore over the reality-based fiction of Zane Grey, it is clear that the term Wild, Wild West referred to much more than treacherous terrain or mountain lions in Colorado, Texas, and California. No, the goings on in Dodge City, Tombstone, and Sutter's Mill as settlers sought to achieve the manifest destiny of the United States, including mayhem and bloodletting, claim jumping and cattle rustling, tarring, feathering, and lynching, a full measure of folks doing what comes naturally. This is also the description of the world in the book of Judges. Israel was without a king. And as they used to describe Minneapolis in the 1940s and the 1950s, the town was wide open. The declaration that there was no king means that the people did not acknowledge the King of glory and his desire to protect, provide, and guide his people. And I believe that the statement that there was no king in Israel and everyone did what was right in their own eyes was a rejection that grieved our Heavenly Father. The second notion I would have you consider is the mutual peace and prosperity requires that we embrace community. Simply put, we must be engaged in the lives of those around us. We must have a love for and we must care about, we must be engaged with the conditions of our fellow persons. This notion was as badly ignored in Laish as it is today. The people of Laish were quiet and secure. In other words, they had moved beyond the mundane struggles of day-to-day existence, while others might go hungry and wrestle with issues from poor garbage pickup and poorer schools, bad street lighting, and crime running unchecked in the streets. These folks had decent lives. We are told that while they had relatives, the kinfolk lived far, far away, and the neighbors that did live nearby were people with whom they had no dealings. The people of Laish never took the position that there was no trouble in the land. They just thought they could move beyond it or insulate themselves from it. They thought that the cancer that plagued the people all around them would never cross their own borders. They felt that those people with running sores and broken families would know enough to be satisfied with a food voucher from the Relief Society or a nice stay at the shelter and some temporary work from the labor pool. They would never bring their broken bodies and crushed spirits to the city limits of Laish. For all of their successes, the people of Laish were the living dead, but they were missing a key life ingredient. They were operating without a sense of responsibility to their fellow man. They were without a burden. I am of the opinion that a burden is energizing. that a burden can inspire us to great exploits. A burden brings its own benefit. You see, when we accept a godly burden, the Lord sends us a vision and energy and resources. A prime example of this is Nehemiah. He, like the people of Laish, had it made. He did not need to trouble himself with the struggles of others because he was living in the king's palace, eating the same food as the king. He wore finery every day because he had to serve the king. And you know the king wouldn't allow his staff to be dressed like Raggedy Ann or Andy. But we are told that in the midst of his prosperity, Nehemiah heard of the suffering and the reproach of his people, and he was burdened. As he took his no man is an island approach to life, began to ponder ways of help. God sent him a vision consistent with his burden. He knew that for the community to be strengthened, the wall of Jerusalem must be rebuilt. This was a calling in his heart that was acted out as he committed his context, intellect, time, and energy to the task. The victory over shame and misfortune was won as he put himself at complete risk to improve the condition of the people. And when the victory was won, God received the glory. Genesis 2 provides a divine insight, a personal assessment of God that indicates that it is not beneficial for a man to dwell alone. Jesus, in his prayer in the garden just before his crucifixion, prayed fervently that we might be one. The unity of the Spirit as we embrace each other's burdens is important to God because it validates the testimony of Jesus Christ. The world that continues to act out of self-centered spirit is amazed when they see the people of God caring about others. They know something is different. The danger of violating God's priorities was brought home to the people of Laish with great effect, but much too late. We are told that folk who had their nose pressed against the window pane of the Grand Life Buffet at Laish crashed through the serenity of those people and took the good life and destroyed their goodly lives. Laish was demolished, and the people had no one to come to their aid in the time of their distress because they lived far from any of their relatives, and the people they lived around didn't care one way or the other because they had no dealings with them. We live in a world in which there is a great need. We have found a way to insulate ourselves from the struggles that surround us. We are involved by fits and starts in accordance with our hectic schedules. You may recall a football game some years ago between the Los Angeles Raiders and the San Francisco 49ers. At some point in the contest, a Raiders running back named Napoleon McCullum was tackled, and watching this made one realize that the way in which McCullum's leg was bent in process of his being brought down was not consistent with how a leg normally bends. In fact, his leg was forced to bend forward from the knee, and the sight was horrible. And despite the determination of the coverage team to make sure that we saw every excruciating moment of the injury as they replayed the tackle again and again and again, one had to turn away and hide her eyes each time. It was found out later that many other people duplicated this approach of avoidance. None of us, by turning our eyes away, reduced the pain Mr. McCullum felt. None of us, by turning away, could alter the reality of the tragedy that occurred. But we could maintain our own comfort level by looking away until they cleared the field of Mr. McCullum and allowed us to return to our escapism without being disturbed by the difficulty of another soul. I must tell you that as Christians, our response to the horrors and challenges of those around us needs to be involvement, not avoidance. The great hope of the believer is that notwithstanding the trouble that finds its way into every life, if we love the Lord with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and our neighbor as ourselves, our lives are in his order. Then our faith is different from that of the people of Laish. For them, there was no deliverer. But we can rejoice with the enthusiasm of the passengers in a stagecoach under terrible attack by desperate outlaws who hear in the distance the trumpet call that signals help is on the way. For unto us that trust God a child is born. Unto those who love and care for our sisters and brothers, a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. To those committed to ordered lives, here comes the deliverer. May God bless all of you. Thank you.